Irashaimase. Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have the Irem Collection Volume 3. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer Irem, the Irem Collection released in July of 2025 for the PlayStation 4 and 5, the Xbox, and the Nintendo Switch, which is the version we're looking at today. Though I've considered picking up previous Irem collections, this is actually the first one I purchased, and I've been pleasantly surprised. It's a solid collection of obscure Irem classics, so especially if you're a fan of the studio, this one is a must-to-have, but even then I would recommend it for any fan of shoot 'em ups, specifically horizontal scrollers, as there are some really solid options here. With that said, I do also like what the package that is presented with, so it's one that is a recommend from the chef. With all that said, let's dive right in and see what we have here. So finding ourselves at the game select, you can see the three titles that are included in this collection. We have Battlecopter, originally released to arcades in 1987, known as Mr. Heli in Japan, Dragon Breed, released to arcades in 1989, and lastly Mystic Riders, released to arcades in 1992. So most of them only had arcade releases, and then they have been included in some compilations since. Mr. Heli also had a PC Engine release, and that is also included on this collection, which I love to see. So, since this is an emulated collection, let's talk a brief bit about what we have under the hood before we dive into the gameplay. So when you select a title, it takes a second to go and load things up, but then we are at this menu. There's two primary modes you can play the game in. You have casual mode, which adds features like rewind, cheats, and save states, so it definitely is your more casual version, or classic, which takes those away, but one thing that both of the titles do add to the original arcade experience is auto-fire. For our purposes, we'll be primarily looking at it under casual. When you select your mode, then we're taken to this screen here, and under the options, we have a lot of options for tweaking the gameplay experience itself. So you can rebind your controls fully for your controller, which I do really appreciate. There's also the ability to turn off the auto-fire should you desire that. Then we have the video options, and here you can change your scaling for your various elements here. We'll keep it by 4:3, but you can also go 1:1 pixel perfect, and you can also go pixel perfect one scale, which was super teeny. You can also change your background wallpaper, and for some titles you can also change the color. There are also shaders, so you have the ability to turn off none, or you can turn on your CRT filters. I do really appreciate that. They have different settings depending on it as far as the way that the filters look. For the base one, you have some options for how you can increase the sharpness of the pixels themselves. Then under gameplay, you can go and tweak your difficulty, starting lives, that sort of thing there, and cheats. So this will differ a little bit depending on which game you're at, but for the most part, it's mostly the same. So we've got the ability to turn on invincibility, max weapon, infinite life. For the most part, we'll just experience the title in its original form. With all that done, then we can start the game, and the emulation is really snappy. When you initially load into the game itself, that's where it loads up the emulation, so I do appreciate that. Putting credits into the machine, since this is the arcade version, we have our launch sequence with Mr. Heli. So Mr. Heli is kind of an interesting game as far as a horizontal scroller is concerned. When it is horizontal scrolling, you usually have control over the scroll yourself, so moving left and right. You can move back to the left and fire that direction, which is pretty important. So we have a couple different attack options. Our primary shot, which is a little on the shorter side, and you can significantly upgrade this. We also have bombs if we're on the ground. That's for primarily mining, and we also have the same button as missiles when you're firing off the ground. So one of the things that's very important with our gameplay is that we're collecting these minerals so we have money to go and purchase upgrades like the one we see there. So if I can collect enough here, we can see that I can purchase a shot upgrade. And that's the way your upgrades are going to be. They'll be hidden in these rock areas that we have to bomb out, in addition to the money that we need to purchase said upgrades. So you've got upgrades for your shot, you've got upgrades for your bombs, for the missiles, and you really do want to upgrade those missiles as well, because if you get them high enough level, they actually become homing missiles. But keep in mind, all this does cost money, and there's even the options for picking up lives, picking up shields. So that's where a lot of the fun in this title comes from. And the ability to scroll the screen left and right is also really appreciated. We also have this enemy right here that just dumps out the crystals, making it really easy to upgrade if we can pick up all that money. So now we just need to be careful and pick up the upgrades that we need. So if you pick up this catfish, it basically acts as a screen clear, and we have all these crystals that are available. However, big crystals you do want to be careful for, is if they hit the ground too hard, they'll shatter into smaller crystals and you'll lose value. So one of the things about Mr. Heli is it doesn't go and have a normal life system. You do have lives, but you also have HP. So as you take hits, depending on the level of the shot, it's not going to be the end of the world. There's also the shield right here, which is actually very important for us to grab. You can get scrolls off the screen, so that's also something you have to worry about. More options to upgrade our bombs there. I don't really feel like that's necessarily the most valuable upgrade for us, so we'll continue to press forward. And then the way this game progresses from here, we'll continue moving through the stage itself. There'll be a section where here you can see that this wall kind of blocks us for a moment, and then we're scrolling back the other direction. So this one is definitely more multi-scroll than any of the other titles on this collection. Though the game itself isn't necessarily very long, the stages can be pretty satisfying in that you have all that progression with collecting the money, and also some of the secrets that you can find. Like this one, if you go and destroy that wall, you can actually raise up this section here and even collect additional money, and we'll grab that. That's basically an HP refill. So now we've come to our mini-boss. Each stage has a section here where we're basically trying to get into what is like an underground bunker, and we have to take out a mini-boss in order to do that. This mini-boss does hit pretty hard though, so we have to be careful, as I took one hit and any more and that'll be the end of us. Boss defeated, and we move on to the underground bunker. So making our way through this bunker, this will ultimately take us to the actual stage boss, and that's what we have for Battlecopter or Mr. Heli. One thing that's interesting, we actually are in a room, but you can't see what's going on. So you have to explore and find where the door is. Once you've done that, you can continue to move through the stage itself. Pretty interesting. But with that, let's go ahead and move to a different title. Now we find ourselves at the mode for Dragon Breed. So Dragon Breed is a really interesting title in that you're controlling a dragon, but you're a human that's sitting on top of it, and that's the weak point. So there's some really neat mechanics at play here. This one's probably the most similar to previous Irem titles. It definitely has some R-type feels in there for sure, so if that's the kind of gameplay you like, this one is definitely one I recommend playing. Once you select the start, you're taken once again right into the emulation, dumping credits into the machine. Pressing start, we have our really neat stage 1, and here there's this brief intro section before we get going. So the character that we're playing is unlocking this dragon, but the Bahamut, and we're using this to defeat like an evil king. So the game does have auto fire available, but as I mentioned, this is more similar to previous Irem titles in that we also have a charge shot. So that charge shot here fires from the dragon itself, and it can become quite powerful depending on what power-ups we have for the dragon. So the dragon starts off with a basic green, but once you pick up these capsules, the dragon starts to have other effects. So the red one, of course, is fire, and should we go with our charge shot here, you can see that it's a really powerful charge shot going forward that's kind of a blue fire. Now here's another place where we could potentially pick up more power-ups, but the dragon can't pick them up. What can we do? We can jump off of the dragon and pick up the power-up that way. There's also this power-up here, which is actually one I love. This is the homing missile. Then we can pull the dragon back towards us, jump back on top. One thing to note, that when you're on the ground, the scrolling stops, and the human character can move around, firing a more powerful version of his shot. One thing to note, as I was mentioning, the human is like your weak point. The dragon is invulnerable to all damage. So this particular, well, we'll jump from the homing shot to this one here. So now we see that we're firing these boomerangs from all around the dragon. So you can use the dragon to protect both like your weak point, the human, from other shots, or you can potentially even use that for damage. Like here we can go and, oops, I didn't quite provide enough space. So that's what happens if you get lose a life, and the game does have a checkpoint system. But you can use the dragon's segments to both protect your main character as well as deal damage to the enemies, as there is significant damage dealt from contact to the dragon to the enemies around. So that's something to keep in mind. So that's the basics of Dragon's Breed itself. So one of the things that's really neat about this one as well is that just like, in addition to the whole riding a dragon element, that's like you know, not necessarily the most unique to shoot 'em ups, but is one that is really well done here. You really have some unique art, kind of like along the lines of what you'd see in some other of their more sci-fi titles that Irem has published. You definitely have that same vibe going here, and some of the bosses later in the game, I'd say, are definitely on like the straight-up grotesque side, so that's something to take into consideration. The game is definitely very much on the metal side of your shoot-'em-ups. A little bit more, and hopefully we can go and see the boss itself. Really, of all the titles on this collection, I'm torn whether I like this one or Mystic Riders better, as they're both excellent titles. I guess it depends on what kind of shoot 'em up you're in the mood for, as Mystic Riders is more of a shoot 'em up and might be the easiest of the three. We'll grab one more, the homing missile power-up. So you can power up the weapons to basically a level 3, as it were. You start at like basics, then you can go and pick up the power-up and power up 3 times. So we do have to be careful here, as the physical contact with, of course, your main character will ultimately end up as a loss. Now we've found ourselves facing the boss itself, and this is one thing that's kind of interesting, was this boss is multi-phase. So we've got the egg that once is cracked, we get like this character firing those homing missiles at us, and then the whole shell itself will transform into another form of the boss itself. And with that, that's Dragon Breed served up for your enjoyment. So now we'll jump to our final title of the day, Mystic Riders. So Mystic Riders was the most recent of these titles to come out, releasing to arcades in 1992. So as far as the gameplay is concerned, Mystic Riders definitely comes across as more of a shoot 'em up than the other titles of the game, and it's also the only one that does go and support 2-player simultaneous, so that's something to keep in mind. So now, as you can go and see, it definitely has a different vibe as far as look than the other two are concerned, although I guess Mr. Heli is a little bit on the shoot 'em up side as well. So we're, let's see, flying over this kind of like a European-looking town with fireworks going off in the background. So our characters go and fly on brooms, and the broom itself is actually really powerful. So we have our primary shot, which you can use as auto, but there's also a charge shot, which for a lot of situations this is actually what you want to use, but there's also one other form of attack that we have. So it's possible to wind up your broom and throw it forward at the enemies, and this is a really powerful attack, as not only does it deal a significant amount of damage and multiple hits towards the enemies, but it also clears enemy shots. One thing to keep in mind is to go and throw that broom, you're pushing in the opposite direction you want it to go. So say we want to throw it up, we press down. So there is a little bit of trickiness involved. In addition, we can also twirl the broom in a 360 kind of maneuver that will act as kind of like your barrel roll, which will temporarily defend us from enemy shots. So you definitely want to master the timing of that particular move. It also deals damage to the enemies and will attack all around us. There's two shot types. There's the electric shot, as well as the a fire or explosive shot. And charge shot wise, for the electric shot, it fires out in this really powerful, well, let's see, charged up at least, a 5-way. And the fire shot will fire out in kind of a star blast. The one thing about the fire is it does penetrate through walls, so depending on where you happen to be in game-wise, then that's what you'd want to use. So let's see if we can go and actually see. Here's our first boss, and we do have to be careful about this boss, because it will sometimes get us cornered having to move around it. So here's once again a situation where we'd want to go and use our broom to effectively attack behind us. And for the sake of argument, let's go and say that I make a mistake here and crash into the boss here. So one thing that we can go and do that I haven't shown so far in casual is we can use the rewind to back things up. So that's the way that the rewind works on this one. It's actually really versatile. So taking out that boss, that's the end of that stage, and that brings us to the end of our demonstration of the 3 titles that are included on the Irem collection. So now let's talk a little bit about some of the pluses and minuses I have for the game itself. So as far as the minus flavors are concerned, one of the biggest things that I have complaint-wise is, as I was mentioning in the introduction, there's just not any thing as far as like documentation for the game themselves are concerned. I would have loved to have some sort of manual, tutorial, anything like that that kind of explained what was going on with the gameplay itself, as I feel like you have a lot of really interesting and unique gameplay in this title. So the lack of that is really disappointing, and that's really my biggest complaint. On the emulation side, at least I'm assuming this is on the emulation side, there was some graphical weirdness with Mr. Heli in some of the stages where I was encountering some tearing in the middle of the stage. So that's something to keep in mind. But on the plus flavor, I just love what they've done with this collection. Going and taking 3 more obscure Irem classics and bringing them to modern audiences, what I feel is a pretty decent price point for what you're getting gameplay. You're getting the 3 games plus the extra home version definitely makes this a title that's, in my opinion, worth picking up. So there's definitely some good value there for the gameplay and the titles that are available. And with that, we find ourselves at the end of this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. The Irem Collection Volume 3, definitely a recommend from the chef. So, as always, we want to thank you so much for joining us this week. We hope you have a wonderful week yourself, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.